The year was 2009. The creator and showrunner of Nip Tuck, Ryan Murphy, came to Fox with an idea for a show. The show would be about a group of high school students, all who felt like they were on the outside, looking in some way, shape, or form. They were all connected through one through line, that being that they were all in the high school glee club. Key to the show's premise, Ryan pitched, was that it would be a musical comedy, one where actors could break into song, both diegetically and non-diegetically. Somber moments would be undercut by musical montages, sung by the actor on screen. Triumphs would be followed by highly choreographed dance sequences, and coming off of the continued financial success of the High School Musical series, Ryan thought it would be a no-brainer. Fox, however, thought otherwise. Musical television shows had been done before, and each time they had faltered and failed. Musicals in general caused strong reactions in people, and if they didn't do it right, it would be a huge loss for the network. Ryan had already produced a success for them before, and they wanted to work with him again, but this seemed like a risk that was destined for, at best, obscurity. But Ryan held firm. He knew he could make the show a success, he just needed a plot. He knew if he got his plot in front of the world, they would see how amazing the show could be. Fox relented, but keeping the budget for the show small, trying in earnest to minimize their losses. Because of that, the cast was mostly filled with virtual unknowns, actors still looking for their big break, some of which had performed on Broadway and other arenas, but looking to make their way into the mainstream. Everything was stacked against the show before it premiered. It didn't have any big name appeal to it, and it could easily be written off as too campy. However, on May 19th, 2009, Glee debuted, and everything changed. To say the show was a success would be a massive understatement. The show, which had barely been given a plot, had broken records upon their first episode debut. People all over the world were proudly declaring themselves as Gleeks. The show had seemingly captured the hearts of audiences who felt unseen and unheard, and saw themselves in the leads who were trying their best to both fit in and stand out. Fox quickly met with Ryan and greenlit the show for a full season after the first episode premiered, flabbergasted at how it had continued to trend on Twitter for days after. The songs from the first episode, likewise, were placed onto iTunes and immediately charted, something that no one had expected. Fans demanded more Glee content, but would have to wait for 6 months before they would be able to see more of the characters they had just begun to love. Despite there being a long wait between the first and second episode, the Glee fandom continued to grow. The small cast was catapulted into superstardom, something they had in no way been prepared for. It was in that first record-breaking, trending episode that the world at large was introduced to Mark Salling. Welcome to today's episode of Dreading, brought to you by my patrons. We are of course going to be going over the life and crimes of Mark Salling. If you have any other suggestions in terms of video topics you would like me to cover, feel free to leave them in the comments below or email me. Also remember to like and subscribe, but with that said, let us begin. Mark was born in Dallas, Texas to his parents, Condi Sue and Robert Salling, Jr. His parents were incredibly religious, and fearing the public school system, they made the decision to homeschool Mark. His father was an accountant and his mother was a high school secretary, but they wanted to make sure he had a well-rounded education that included emphasis on the arts, and opted to put him in music classes when he was just 5. It was there that he learned to play piano and guitar and quickly found a passion for music. He began to write songs at the age of 6 and would often force his family to sit down and watch him perform his own songs. From that point on, Mark was adamant that he would be a performer. It wasn't long until Condi Sue, who had taken the bulk of his homeschooling on, realized that Mark had too much energy for her alone to contain. He was a bit of a troublemaker with a proclivity to daydream, and she didn't know how to fully keep his focus. They then made a decision to put him into school, sending him first to Providence Christian School in Dallas, Texas. Shortly after, Mark transferred to a new school, Our Redeemer Lutheran, where he stayed until his 8th grade graduation. Throughout this time, Mark made it clear to all of his teachers and classmates that he was going to be famous. He would often break out into song and put on skits for his classmates, sometimes in the middle of a lesson. Much to his teachers' chagrin, he was the class clown and loved making the people around him smile. And if you were to ask him, and he did it all to let the people around him know that one day he would be famous. Because of his insistence, Condi Sue and Robert decided that they would let Mark pursue acting, but only if it didn't get in the way of his schoolwork, which Mark readily agreed to. At the age of 14, he got his first acting role in the movie Children of the Corn 4, The Gathering, starring Naomi Watts.
From the world of Stephen King comes the darkest mystery of the year.
You and I both know there's nothing to be afraid of, right?
I'm not afraid of anything.
Of an evil set upon a small Midwestern town.
Great.
It did something to him. The fever.
And a young medical student who must solve its mysteries.
Whatever happened to my boy is going to happen to him.
Now, the secret of the force behind the terror will be revealed.
I've come for the children.
Children of the Corn 4, The Gathering.
Scorpion killed 8 people and an unborn baby. Favorite food, pistachio ice cream.
Lovely.
Great guitar player. Could have been a rock star. I got all 30 of them.
Who says kids don't have heroes anymore?
Grace, how are you going to stay?
I'll stay till Mom's feeling better.
They should just throw her in the cracker factory and call it a day.
James.
Mark hoped that this would be his big break, and that he would be the next Macaulay Culkin, but that wasn't the case. The film didn't make waves at the box office, and one of the most positive reviews called it a marginally better effort than Part 3, while another stating that it was highly derivative without any sense of wit or irony. But no one seemed to tell Mark that the movie didn't do well. After his time on set for his first movie, Mark had begun acting out. He felt as if he was on the track to be a movie star and started to neglect his studies and behave disrespectfully to his parents. When pushed to behave in class, Mark would respond that he didn't need whatever it was that they were trying to teach him because he was too famous and would be leaving for Hollywood any day. His parents were at a loss, telling him he could no longer go on auditions and that they weren't going to allow him to pursue acting. But that did little to quell him. In order to put a stopper on his negative behavior, his parents enrolled him in Culver Military Academy, a boarding school in Indiana. What happened to Mark at Culver Military Academy that caused him to change so profoundly is something that he seemingly never discussed with anyone publicly or privately. Ex-girlfriends who came forward after his fame would discuss how he became an incredibly guarded and private person, but ultimately no one truly could pinpoint why. While a former vocal coach would come forward and state outright that he believed Mark was a victim of abuse himself, though nothing has ever been confirmed. It should be noted, though, that during the research portion of this video, we did happen upon a case of a former colonel who worked at Culver Military Academy, who was found with 2 laptops containing thousands of images of child pornography, which was almost identical to what Mark would be found with years later. Based on the minimal information we have available to us, it's impossible to state whether Mark even came into contact with this person. However, it is not uncommon for boarding schools like Culver Academy to be hotbeds for predators looking to take advantage of vulnerable people. When children and teens are sent to boarding schools, youth camps, or retreats that focus on disciplining the youth, they are put in an environment where they are not trusted or believed. Predators often seek out employment at places like this in order to not only have access to minors, but because the system is ultimately set up in a way where even if a child were to speak out about being abused by a staff member, they would be written off as lying. To be clear, no proof exists that I was able to find that states Mark ever met this person who was caught with one of the biggest stashes of child pornography in the history of the state. But given his profound and radical shift from a happy-go-lucky class clown with a slight ego problem to an aloof, withdrawn person whose girlfriends would state they were battling with their own personal demons, it is clear that something happened at Culver that caused Mark to change abruptly. And given his later crimes, many believe he was mirroring what he saw while there at best, or mirroring what had been done to him. After a short while, his parents saw progress in his behavior, so Mark was able to transfer to Lake Highlands High School. They also allowed him to once again pursue some acting on the side, and he was cast in one episode of Walker, Texas Ranger with Chuck Norris. 2 years after, he graduated in 2001, at the age of 19. Shortly after graduating, Mark once again set his sights on the entertainment industry and moved to Pasadena, California, right outside of LA, in order to attend the Los Angeles Music Academy College. While he was technically attending college, it seemed that he still felt the same way he had in his youth, being that while school was well and good for other people, he didn't necessarily need it. because he was going to be so famous. He began to go on auditions, hoping to be the next big thing. He felt that his resume and his abilities spoke for themselves at first, proud that he had booked an entire movie when he was just 14. But he quickly became aware that while he had gone to high school, a lot of other actors his age had been networking and making a name for themselves. Agents didn't seem to be too impressed that he'd been in a movie 10 years ago, and no one knew who he was now. It would be years before Hollywood would cast Mark in any projects, with him booking only one named role in a direct-to-video horror movie called Graveyard in 2006. But Mark wasn't picky. He didn't care how he would get famous, or from what. He just wanted to be famous. As he continued to go on auditions, he started producing music under the name Jericho. He then put out an entirely self-produced, self-made album called Smoke Signals, and hoped once again it would lead to more mainstream success. He tried to market his music on MySpace and made it a point to go to various local open mic nights and coffee shops with the hopes that some producer would hear him and be blown away. But it seemed the more he pushed, the less people cared. After nothing but doors closing in his face, one day, like fate, Mark ended up getting the audition for a show that seemed custom made for him, and for the first time in years, landed a role. There isn't a word in the English vocabulary to surmise what a cultural juggernaut Glee was. Many of the main cast has likened the success to a drug and described their rise to fame as quick and turbulent. They were thrown from relative obscurity into the limelight with no preparation, and were quickly inundated with love and support from the public, namely young teens who saw themselves in the characters of the show. Many of the cast, including Mark, were still working normal jobs when it premiered, but quickly realized being out and about was no longer possible for them, as they were repeatedly swarmed by hordes of fans and onlookers. Fans flocked to the stars' Twitters, writing them love notes, telling them that in one episode they had changed the course of their lives and more. And as the resident eyeliner-wearing bad boy, Mark became one of television's most desirable leading men. And Mark, for one, loved the attention. So much so that despite having a 2-year-long relationship with his co-star Naya Rivera that was incredibly serious, he would publicly state time and time again in the press that he was single. Naya would describe in her book, Sorry Not Sorry, that this was a choice he said was made by his manager, because his fans, mostly young girls, would be less interested in him if he were attached, and not an eligible young bachelor that they saw themselves having a chance with. It wasn't important to him, he told her, but the thousands of young teenage girls who idolized him wouldn't like him as much if he was dating someone else, and would be less likely to support him professionally. In the same book, Naya would go on to posit that the reality of the situation was that he wanted to continue to sleep with other people, including those young fans, and she was simply getting in the way of that. She also stated that his later crimes were not shocking to her in the slightest. But it wasn't just acting success. Because Glee was a musical show, music that Mark was featured on was being listened to and downloaded by the millions, with his first solo on the show, Sweet Caroline, hitting the Billboard's Top 100. Every aspect of his dreams were coming true. He quickly decided to put out an album, this under his own name. He hoped that his success on the show would lead to even more eyes and ears on his album, with him going so far as to say in an interview with Teen Vogue that his dream would be to have his own music featured on the show. However, that never came to be, and his album failed to make an impact, with even diehard fans of the show not knowing about its release. Still, Mark was the most successful he'd ever been. Because of this widespread fan reaction to Glee, the network made the decision to fund a nationwide arena tour, with every member of the talented cast slated to join and perform live. This was exactly what Mark had been waiting for to happen, and it seemed that nothing could go wrong. But all good things must come to an end. While the success of Glee and the actors who appeared on it was rapid, the downfall was slow and painful. People fell out of love gradually over time, and this included the actors. As is the case with most popular shows, the actors become too likened to their characters. Amber Riley was Mercedes, Chris Culver was Kurt, and Mark Salling was Puck. The fans had a hard time differentiating between them. Mark hadn't taken on any other significant roles during this time on the show, and so people only saw him as that character, which made him all the less employable. Mark had gone so far as to turn down roles early in the show's tenure, thinking like he had when he was younger, that he was famous enough that eventually more parts would be brought to him, that Glee and the subsequent tours were just a stepping stone to further fame and fortune. He was once again proven wrong. As time went on and the show was more heavily criticized, opportunities stopped coming. His manager stopped getting calls requesting him, and he realized that he had made a big mistake. Eventually, when Mark's role was cut down from a main cast member to a recurring guest appearance, he began to go out on more auditions, where the only role he was able to book was the lead in the made-for-TV movie Rocky Road.
Mr. Price, is that a new suit?
Sit down, Harrison. The merger didn't go through. We have to downsize. The car, the apartment, and it pains me to say this, your job.
Mr. Hines, I am available. Position's been filled. All right. Jonathan, hey, it's me, your brother. I was just wondering if I could crash on your couch. Okay, I'll just head to a hotel. All right. Hey, Mom.
Harry!
Look who's here. Are you staying at the hotel again?
Actually, I thought I'd stay here for a couple days, maybe a week.
So how's biz? You know, if you just stayed here with the ice cream business, we could be Ben and Harry.
Guys, please excuse me for a minute. I have phone calls to make.
Susie!
Harry? I'm glad you're here, Harry.
Really?
He's regressed back into being a teenager.
Should have done this weeks ago.
Hey, one sec. I'm in the Palace of Doom.
So are we.
So you're living here?
I wouldn't call it living.
Okay, this is the key to the truck that sells ice cream. If you're gonna be living here, you're gonna be jingling that bell.
Not the paper hat.
Hey, kids, who wants ice cream?
I'm not supposed to talk to strangers.
I'm not a stranger. I grew up here.
If you grew up, then why are you wearing a paper hat?
You're new, huh?
You lose, old timer.
Can they kiss?
What do you think?
The change in roles and the slow decaying fame was said to take a toll on Mark, who was already described as a dark, morose person who was already struggling with his own demons. But it would only get worse from here.
I'm nothing like Puck on Glee. I'm worse.
Guy, but in real life, I'm the worst guy.
In January of 2013, one of Mark Salling's ex-girlfriends, Roxanne Gorzella, accused him of committing sexual battery on her during their relationship. She stated that he had tricked her into having unprotected sex with him by putting condoms on in front of her, then quickly taking them off in an act that is formally known as stealthing. Roxanne knew that he had been cheating on her with other women and had a tendency to sleep with his fans when on the road, and worried that he had potentially given her an STD. She asked him to come with her to get tested to make sure they were both clean, but he stopped responding to her texts and calls. Panicked and angry, Roxanne then went to Mark's house to try to get him to go with her to get tested. She ended up finding him in bed with another woman, again not using a condom. It was then when he grabbed her by the arms and pushed her down to the ground, where she hit her head. That same day, she went to the police and filed a report for the assault, and they took photos of her injuries. At the time, Mark's role on Glee was being actively sized down, and he had begun to struggle with getting acting roles. However, when the news of the lawsuit broke, he tried to play it off as being defamatory and false, stating in an interview that he couldn't wait to get his day in court, and he would be fighting his ex every step of the way. One of his reps also gave a statement to TMZ, saying that the lawsuit was a quote-unquote textbook case of a disgruntled girl looking to cash in on a TV star's success. Multiple other statements like that came out, with supposedly anonymous friends of Gorzella telling TMZ, Yahoo News, and other publications that they knew Mark, and he'd never touched Roxanne in anger. And she had become obsessed with him since they stopped sleeping together. More still claimed to have witnessed this incident and said Roxanne was the aggressor, breaking down his door and forcing him to strike her. Oddly enough, none of these eyewitness reports ever made themselves known. Their statements went against the police reports that were taken the same day, and when Mark did respond in court, none of their claims were ever mentioned. Despite his outright denial and statements about suing Gorzella, Mark ended up settling the lawsuit, having to pay her $2.7 million, and though he firmly denied any part of her claims, it was clear that Gorzella could back up what she was saying with text messages, emails, photos, and the police report. The lawsuit marked a downward spiral for Mark. Again, his part on Glee had been massively cut back, and he wasn't booking anything that he had been auditioning for. Finally, in 2015, directly after Glee had wrapped, he landed a lead role in a movie called Gods and Secrets, alongside Denise Richards and Jane Seymour. Mark stated that this would have been his big comeback, and it just might have been, until Mark was caught with thousands of images and videos of child porn. A separate, still unidentified ex-girlfriend had spoken to the LAPD about her suspicion that Mark had child porn in his possession. She stated that she personally believed that he had sexual images of minors on various electronic devices, and that he was a danger to children based on the things he told her during their relationship. When they had last gotten intimate, he had asked if she wanted to watch child porn with him, to which she said no. He then tried to play it off as a joke, but she was disturbed. He had tried to speak with her afterwards to explain that he was just kidding. He didn't actually own any child porn, but she felt strongly enough that day she went and made a police report. The LAPD took her claims seriously and worked for 2 weeks to corroborate her story, making sure that she wasn't a spurned lover trying to get revenge. December 29th, 2015, cops raided Salling's home, retrieved every electronic device, and arrested the 33-year-old. According to Crime Watch Daily, who worked with the LAPD to break the story, Salling's door had to be broken down because he refused to let the police serve the warrant and tried to keep them out of his home. It seemed that he had a vague idea as to why they were there and what they were looking for, as he tried to get rid of some of his electronics. However, the police were able to break down the door and stop him from destroying anything. Before being taken away, the cops asked Salling for his passwords, specifically to the one laptop and one phone, but Salling refused them access. The raid was meticulously planned, and the cops had brought experts in to unlock his electronics even without his compliance. As he was transported to jail, the police set up a large trailer in front of his house, where they reviewed the contents of every laptop, cell phone, and thumb drive in his home, and unfortunately found over 50,000 videos and images of child exploitative material, most of which involved children between the ages of 3 and 5 being sexually assaulted in various ways. Mark was extremely organized when it came to his porn, with images and videos categorized by name and age, with the youngest being 2 years old. One of the officers who had to process the evidence recalled that the images and videos Mark had on his computer was some of the worst he had ever seen, and he had been working in child sex crimes for over a decade at that point. According to court documents, all the offending material involved children who were no older than 6 years old, and one of the files Mark had was titled Jazz's Guide, and it was a manual on how to assault and sexually abuse little girls between the ages of 3 to 6. These images were also found on every single one of his devices, including a thumb drive, a separate computer, and his phone, meaning that he had multiple points of access, and that any defense that tried to say that these images were planted on him by another party was incredibly far-fetched. After Salling had been arrested, another one of his sexual paramours came forward privately to the police and stated that Salling had also tried to get her to watch the videos with him while they were having sex, which corroborated the other ex's story. She, however, didn't know how serious he was. She described talking to him afterwards and how he had convinced her that he had been kidding and she couldn't take a joke. With his insistence, she decided not to bring the issue up to the police, but stopped talking to him altogether. After he was arrested, Mark immediately bailed himself out the same day and tried to appear as if everything was normal in his life. He continued to be spotted going out to bars, getting groceries, and working out, most likely at the behest of his management, who told him to act as if nothing was wrong. He denied the claims and seemed to be in good spirits. The director of his latest movie tweeted out that he would wait to see if Mark was actually charged and indicted with any crimes, as he didn't want to cave to cancel culture until he got all the facts. Other ex-girlfriends of Mark later came forward in the media and discussed how he would regularly cheat on them, usually choosing to keep women around him who were freshly 18 or seemed to look younger, and knowingly spread STDs to them through his refusal to wear condoms. On more than one occasion, he would ask his girlfriends to wear children's clothing and dress younger during sex. In one instance, one of his exes stated that she thought he liked the clothes because they were small on her, never realizing he liked them because they made her look like a child. He would also express anger towards them if they considered altering their bodies in any way that made them look more adult. Naya Rivera and another one of his exes both spoke about how he chilled to them romantically after they got boob jobs. A separate ex talked about how, at the height of his fame from Glee, he made it very clear to her that it didn't matter what she wanted in the relationship, because he had a bevy of other women waiting in the wings. He then proceeded to show her pictures of all the girls who were in his DMs, and she was shocked to see how young some of them were. But she thought better of him. She thought he wasn't serious about sleeping with any of the girls he had shown her, but wanted to impart on her that he was a heavily sought-after guy, and he could leave her if he wanted to. Unfortunately, he meant both. With the research and the intense investigation into Mark, the police were 100% certain that they would find child exploitative material in his home before they even searched it. And while the reason has never been given, in his indictment, the grand jury charges that, on or about December 26, 2015, 4 days before his arrest, he received a MacBook Air that contained images of child pornography on them, and that 3 days after, he received a thumb drive that had multiple pedophilic videos on them. From what is publicly available, it appears that these packages were tracked with an idea of what was in them, and that Mark receiving these was all the confirmation they needed. Much like the Josh Duggar case, Josh used the dark web with a Tor browser and electronically shook hands with an undercover officer. It is widely believed that at some point while trying to get hold of child porn, Mark made contact with an undercover agent who then was made aware of the purchasing of the laptop and thumb drive. At this point, they had confirmed he had in fact received it and they moved in. In June of 2016, a full year after being arrested, Mark pleaded not guilty. However, the judges ruled that due to the charges against him, he was to stay 100 feet away from all schools, parks, arcades, and other places of the sort. He was also informed that he was no longer legally allowed to be alone with any minor, would have to turn in his passport to prevent fleeing the country, and he would be required to wear a GPS monitoring device at all times, so the authorities would know where he was. Shortly after surrendering his passport and getting the ankle monitor, Mark made an attempt on his life. While in the bathroom of his home, he slit both of his wrists, then promptly began to freak out and screamed for his roommate to help him. When his roommate saw what he had done, he made this 911 call.
Correct.
Okay, is that a house, apartment, or business?
House.
Okay, and you're right by Wine?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes,
so you're calling one, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what is the emergency? Three? Okay. The patient right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, about how old is the patient? Scientific approximate. And then you said you are with them. Are they awake right now? And are they alert where they can answer your questions correctly and appropriately? Okay, good. And then you said...
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. We do have the paramedics responding. Okay, we're going to be there, okay?
Okay.
We're going to be there shortly.
Okay.
Now, watch the patient closely. If they become... Unlock your front door and be looking out for us. Just wave us down when you see us, okay?
Okay.
And if anything changes where they get worse before we get there, call us back. Okay, we're on our way. We'll be there shortly.
Thank you.
Are you comfortable hanging up the phone?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, good. Everything's...
Sir, do you know how long that they're going to take?
They're about a mile out, so they're going to go with lights and sirens. I'm going to say 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay, great.
Okay, and it is no. Okay, we're on our way. We'll be there shortly. Flag down the fire department when you see us. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Okay.
The paramedics rushed him to the hospital where they were able to treat him with no issue. However, because of the attempt on his own life, Mark was given a psychiatric evaluation, which he ultimately failed. He was kept in the hospital for a couple days after that, until it was decided that he would enter a rehab facility that specializes in psychological issues. News of this attempt on his own life wouldn't come to light until months later, when Mark took a plea bargain. In exchange for pleading guilty on 2 accounts of owning child pornography, the district attorney lessened Mark's potential sentence from 20 years in prison to 4 to 7, with 20 years supervised release. He also agreed to paying $50,000 restitution to each of the victims, that being the children in the images he owned. Mark had been willing, originally, to work with the district attorney and plead guilty to a lesser charge. However, he was adamant that he didn't want to do any time in jail. The DA told him that wasn't an option, and there was no version of reality that would keep him out of jail, as he had been caught with one of the most graphic collections of child porn in history. Giving him a slap on the wrist and probation was not an option. Mark truly didn't seem to believe them. He fired multiple of his attorneys after they stated that the deal he was being offered of 4 to 7 years in prison and 20 years probation was the best they were going to get. It seemed that Mark viewed going to prison as a fate worse than death, and when he did eventually sign a plea deal, pleading guilty to owning thousands of images of child porn, he ultimately signed his death certificate. Just a month after he pled guilty, barely 5 months after his last attempt on his life, and leaving rehab, before he could be properly sentenced, Mark Salling, at the age of 35, committed suicide by hanging. Mark had walked to a riverbed that was across from a Little League field he had previously liked to frequent when he was allowed 100 feet from the park. When the police found him, he had been dead for quite some time and left a note. It was also found that he had been drunk at the time of his death and had taken his ankle monitor off, which was what originally raised flags with the police. Mark's death would be his final self-serving action. His victims, his family, and his fans would never know why he did what he did, and would never get any sort of resolution. It's hard to wrap this case up, as it feels so open-ended. But with Mark's death, his legacy died with him. If you got to this point in the video, please feel free to like and subscribe. Comment if there is a case you would like to see us cover, and for more content, check out our Patreon. Thank you for watching, and remember, stay safe.